Hello and welcome to Ministry and Theology Forum, under the aegis of the Accomplished Professors podcast group, about which more can be found at our website. Today's podcast, Psalm 90, Window to Einstein's Time-Space Continuum. Psalm 90, verses 1 through 4. A prayer of Moses, the man of God. Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You return man to dust and say, Return, O children of man. For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. Psalm 90 begins with those famous words penned by Moses while en route with the people of Israel to the Promised Land. Yet before Moses had penned the words of this psalm, he had already been told by God himself on Mount Sinai of his eternal pre-existence beyond time and space. For when they're asking God to tell him the name of the one sending him to the people of Israel, Moses was told, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. The greater significance of those words would not be lost on Moses, as seen here at the beginning of Psalm 90, nor would they be lost on Israel's subsequent generations, as later seen in two of King David's Psalms, and as still later spoken by the Levites to the people of Israel at the 955 BC dedication of Solomon's Temple, and as yet later penned in the beautiful Jewish Yigdal prayer, subsequently turned into the Christian hymn, The God of Abraham Praise. Back then, Moses and Israel took on faith what we, thanks to Albert Einstein, now more plainly see as fact, due to his discovery of the time-space continuum, where matter is contained in time-space such that, as many would now say, time-space tells matter where to go, and matter tells time-space how to curve. All of which perpetually testifies to the existence of an ingeniously intelligent creator who exists beyond the realm of time, space, and matter that he created. And while it would be delusional to think that all of this happened through a material process involving random chance, the work of Albert Einstein will here ultimately show us that it also necessarily had a beginning in which neither time-space nor matter previously existed. For while the Bible is not primarily a scientific book per se, when it touches on matters of science, it is always correct, as seen in the 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews in these words. Up until the early 20th century, it had long been thought by some that a material world and universe had always existed, which I may have mentioned about 20 years ago and then reading this verse to my Bible's literature class, en route to making another point later in that chapter. After then reading the words, By faith we understand that the world was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made out of things which do not appear, I then momentarily quipped to the class something like, of course that doesn't take much faith in a post E equals MC squared world. The facial expression on one student in that class in particular then suggested the truth of that remark may have landed pretty well. For that now famous equation from Einstein's special theory of relativity showed the world the potential conversion between energy and matter, and by greater implication, that if mass could produce great energy, then great energy could produce visible matter, something until then long ridiculed by some. Harvard Emeritus Professor Alan Dershowitz has said the atheist position must answer a difficult question. How can something come from nothing? That's a very good question. Of course, now well answered by Einstein's energy-mass conversion, reflected in the equation E equals mc squared. Yet that wise question by Alan Dershowitz contains yet greater ramification, touching how, for example, Jesus Christ in Mark chapter 6 could, as though with apparent ease via a prayer invoking the power of his heavenly Father, feed more than 5,000 people with but 5 loaves and 2 fish. Something came from nothing in the creation of the universe, and something came from nothing in every miracle Christ performed on earth. For if E equals mc squared, then m equals E over c squared, with the right side of that equation now taking on greater significance in its implicit mathematical distribution of E, in this case divine energy, by the dividing factor of the speed of light squared, which might in turn cause us to ask ourselves what is so special about light in this regard, as the variable c squared also appears in another famous equation for time dilation from Einstein's theory of special relativity. Part of the genius of Einstein, a trait albeit to a lesser extent shared with him by Steve Jobs, was recognizing the value in something that others perhaps didn't fully appreciate. The denominator in the right side of this equation for time dilation was a factor called gamma by Dutch physicist Hendrik Lorentz in his work on electromagnetism. Einstein realized the greater relevance of this equation to the relativity of time, where t sub 2 on the left indicates time as experienced by a moving object approaching the speed of light, as though in a spaceship, and t sub 1 in the right side numerator indicates what we would think of as more stationary time, such as would be simultaneously experienced by someone on Earth. Then in the denominator below, v is velocity traveled by the space traveler, and c is, of course, the speed of light, here both squared. What this equation shows is the inseparable link between time and matter in space, such that it is impossible for one's speed to reach the speed of light, for before that can happen, time will slow down so as to prevent it from ever occurring. Many were, in the 1960s and later, introduced to the spaceship example of Einstein, in which one man flies to and returns from a distant location in space, while another during that time remains on Earth. Let's now fly through this, my apologies for the pun, en route to its greater ultimate significance involving light. Our spaceship will travel about 176,000 miles per second, or about 10,000 miles per second slower than the speed of light, which is over 186,000 miles per second. Plugging those into v squared and c squared above, respectively, we get the center right numbers in gray, which after that division produce 0.9, which subtracted from 1 in turn gives us the square root of 0.1, as now shown in the 0.316 denominator figure, which divided into the numerator, 1, above it, shows us that the man on Earth here aged more than 31 years, while the man in the spaceship only aged 10, due to how his faster travel speed dilated, or in effect slowed time, as he experienced it on his voyage. But let's now pretend that rather than our space traveler's experienced time slowing so as to prevent him from traveling at the speed of light, it is instead possible to do so, just to see the math involved. And so let's see what happens when v squared in the above equation becomes c squared, the same as the speed of light. 1 minus c squared divided by c squared is 0, the square root of which is also 0, resulting in a denominator of 1 divided by 0, which is infinity. And anything divided by infinity, such as rt sub 1 in the numerator, is in turn, of course, 0. In other words, if someone were to travel at the speed of light, their time would be 0, and therefore time for them would cease to exist. This is why the speed of light plays such a central role in both Einstein's time dilation and his energy-to-mass conversion. For the only entity that can travel at the speed of light is God himself, who is light, and who as such exists beyond the time-space continuum he created, and for whom, therefore, 1,000 years in his sight are but as yesterday, as written by Moses in Psalm 90, and later echoed by the Apostle Peter, in writing, "With the Lord a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day." This is likely why the first act of creation involved the creation of light, in which God was then providing the world a visible expression of himself and his own character, as the Apostle Paul so well wrote to the church at Corinth. For it is the God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. We again see this in the book of Revelation's description of the heavenly realm when we read, "And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God is its light, and its lamp is the Lamb." Thus, the greater theological significance of the speed of light being unapproachable reflects the fact that God's person for us is likewise unapproachable, apart from the intervening and redemptive work of Christ and his atoning death on the cross, in which man, in his human effort, cannot and does not reach God in his own power, but rather God reaches down to humanity in the person of Jesus Christ, so bridging the gap on our behalf between the deathly shortcoming of human sinfulness and the divine light of life offered to us through Christ. For more about this, see the notes below the video. Of course, recognizing this central role of Christ as relative to the creation of time and space answers the question many may have had, as I did in my youth, and later mentioned to my students. What happened before, the thing that happened before, the thing that happened before, the thing that happened before that, and what is beyond, the thing that is beyond, the thing that is beyond that. For the answer to that is, of course, found in the person of Christ, who is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of created time and space. This also answers the question how God the Father could beget a Son without that Son existing after him in time, as well as the question, what caused God? As causality, in both instances, requires time before and after the fact, neither of which then existed outside the created time-space continuum. Not recognizing this leaves one with the aforementioned quandary regarding what occurred before something else in time, or exists beyond something else in space, a challenge to anyone holding the view that matter itself has somehow been forever pre-existing, a previously long-standing viewpoint Albert Einstein came to reject due to and after his formulation of the theory of general relativity, which we will now consider. Fellow physicist Max Planck, here pictured to Albert Einstein's left, once told Einstein not to try tackling the problem of gravity, as it had already been tried and was too difficult. Einstein wisely ignored that advice, resulting in his general theory of relativity, which interrelated gravity with time, space, and matter, and for the first time in human history explained with great mathematical precision why Mercury's orbit around the Sun differed from those of other planets. Einstein's theory of special relativity has here shown the creation of matter from energy to be entirely plausible. His theory of general relativity and its ramifications showed the creation of matter from energy to be entirely necessary. To show this, we will now draw upon relevant analysis by physicist Stephen C. Meyer, about which more can be found in the notes. Two major points here are paramount. Meyer tells us that though Einstein's work on general relativity showed him early on that the universe must be expanding, he was then yet at first still more comfortable with the universe in which matter was pre-existing, as others had until then long thought. So he added a constant to his math that preserved that possibility. Then all of that changed when astronomer Edwin Hubble, some years later, invited Einstein to the Mount Wilson Observatory in Pasadena, where through one of its telescopes he showed Einstein irrefutable evidence of an expanding universe due to a phenomenon called the red shift. As seen on this slide, the red shift is to light as the Doppler effect is to sound, such that what Hubble showed Einstein in 1931 at Mount Wilson was a universe whose light acted like the decreasing pitch of a train moving away from someone. Meyer tells us that after Hubble showed Einstein the red shift then occurring in all visible directions, Einstein publicly announced he had been wrong and then subscribed to the position of an expanding universe. Yet from there one might question, from what point did the universe start expanding? Meyer then shows us that Stephen Hawking's follow-up work on Einstein's general relativity theory, as further facilitated by mathematicians George Ellis and Roger Penrose, shows that the universe must necessarily have started expanding from a point of singularity in which Einstein's time-space continuum was so tightly wrapped together that it was impossible for any matter to exist. In other words, what the takeaway should be then for all of us is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Or, here echoing the words of Christian commentator Ken Ham, in the beginning, when God created time, in the time-space continuum, he also created the heavens and the earth, placing all its matter within that time-space continuum. So when God himself says in Psalm 118 that this is the day the Lord has made, he isn't kidding. This is the day the Lord has made because God created time, the time in which that day exists and everything therein, blue sky, trees, and human friendship, and all from the gracious hand of one who was and is, from everlasting to everlasting. Thank you for watching. May God bless everyone watching this video with a knowledge of the truth and a life of righteousness that leads to prosperity for themselves and fosters the same among those around them. This has been a presentation of the Accomplished Professors Podcast Group, about which more can be found at our website.